Thanks for joining. Hopefully you come for a session on PowerShell Core. I think the official title is PowerShell Core Introduction. So we're going to spend some time having a look at PowerShell Core. Who has taken PowerShell Core for a spin? Anybody? A few, couple. You've installed it? Have you started it? Yeah. Nah. Okay. Well, first and foremost, thanks to our sponsors, Ticketmaster and G Research. We were told to put these in the slides by Rob. Apparently, I'm the only one who followed that advice. No. Oh, you'll do it. All right. Yeah. Okay. So, us intelligent people that can read, literate people, have decided to put that in our slides. So, thank you to our sponsors today, who obviously, without them, the price for this event would be a lot more. So, that's me. I'm Iain Brighton. The bit that you probably should be aware of, obviously my name, but me personally, forget about my work stuff, but me personally, I'm heavily involved in the PowerShell community. I spend a lot of time writing and contributing to the PowerShell DSC resources up on GitHub, so if you've got any questions around that, then come and speak to me. I'm also the author of the Lability and the Scribo module, so I know Andre's doing a session on Lability later, which is all around deploying lab environments. So if you want to find out more about that, the session at the end of the day is the one for you. Scribo is a PowerShell documentation framework, so if you are in a corporate IT environment and you need to document things, then you might want to take a look at Scribo. What are we going to go through today? Well, I'm going to cover off what .NET what. So what is .NET? What are the available versions? How does that transition into PowerShell Core? And then we're going to discuss a little bit around Windows PowerShell, PowerShell Core, the differences, and then we're going to get into some demos. Yeah. So what are the options that we have available for .NET? And historically, the .NET framework is, for us Windows admins, is what we're used to. So the full .NET framework, there's a client profile for the .NET framework, but it's the version of .NET that has been around for a long time. So .NET 3.5, 3, 4, 4.5, 4.6, all that sort of stuff. It ships with Windows. There are updates available for it, but this is your traditional full stack .NET framework. This is what Windows PowerShell is based upon. Yeah? So the version of Windows PowerShell that you're running is tied to the underlying version of .NET that is on your system. Yeah? Microsoft have obviously open sourced PowerShell, .NET Core, and .NET Core is a cross-platform implementation of .NET, okay? So this is up on GitHub. You can go and have a look at it. It's open source. You can contribute to it, and it runs on Windows, Mac, and Linux. Yeah? The key is it is a subset of the full .NET framework. Yeah? So the full .NET framework that ships in Windows, .NET Core is a subset of that. So things that are tied to Windows-specific features, so WinForms, WPF, yeah, they are available in the .NET framework. They will probably never ever be open source and available in .NET Core. Yeah? So anything that is Windows specific typically is not going to be in there. Obviously there's some APIs and things that are tied in Windows that aren't available on Linux, or there's no necessarily graceful translation of those APIs across the different operating systems. But it's a portable installation. So what I mean by that is you can have multiple versions of the .NET Core framework side by side. Typically it's going to be bundled with an application. So rather than having an application that's tied to a specific version of the .NET framework, and if you need to upgrade the .NET framework, then that's a big install, big task on a Windows environment. With a .NET Core installation, the developers can ship the required version of the .NET Core framework along with the executable, and they can live side by side. So, you know, there is no GAC, so Global Assembly Cache, for instance, with the .NET Core. Yeah, there is for the traditional full framework. So some other terminology that you may or may not be aware of that Microsoft banding around is this .NET Standard. Yeah. So .NET Standard is not another version of .NET. It's a way of targeting or documenting, actually, is probably more the correct way of saying it, the APIs that are exposed by the versions of .NET frameworks. Yeah. So .NET Standard 2.0 or 2 that's out is a broader subset of APIs that are available across the various distributions of .NET Core. Go back to .NET Standard 1.6, there were fewer APIs. Yeah? So if an application targets .NET Core 1.6 or .NET Standard 1.6, the subset of APIs that are available to that standard is less than if an application is targeting .NET Standard 2, then the .NET Framework supports a broader set of APIs, and logically .NET Core or .NET Standard, sorry, I need to rename some of this thing. .NET Standard 2.0 is the broadest set of APIs, so therefore it's going to be higher compatibility across Linux, Mac, and Windows. PowerShell Core, PowerShell 6, is targeting .NET Standard 2.0. So a lot of the APIs and a lot of the historical issues we have with PowerShell Core when it was targeting, or the .NET Standard 1.6 was available, a lot of the commandlets weren't there or they didn't work, whereas they do work now. Okay, we'll see some of that stuff. Any questions on .NET? Good, because I'm not. Oh.
So when you said .NET Standard, then is .NET Standard something that sits over the top of
Correct.
.NET Core and .NET Framework?
Yeah, so .NET Standard, yes, correct, it will do. So .NET Standard 2.0 will say that if an application is targeting .NET Standard 2.0, these are the availability, these are the APIs that have to be available in that kind of API surface, if you will. So an application can specify that it wants to target .NET Standard 1.6 or .NET Standard 1 or .NET Standard 2. Obviously, the later versions have a greater API surface and more compatibility. And what Microsoft is saying is if your application targets 2.0, then there should be, not that you won't need to do any work if it's a .NET application. If it's a WinForms or WPF application, then you're out of luck, really. But if it doesn't, then there should be very little that you need to do to move an application from targeting .NET Framework to targeting .NET Core. Yeah? Obviously, PowerShell.core is using the .NET Core framework. Yeah? So here's just a bit of an alternate spin on this. Obviously, I robbed this slide from Microsoft. So the .NET Framework 4 is distributed with Windows. You can upgrade that. You can upgrade the version of .NET that's on your machine. You can only have one version of .NET. Obviously, there are compatibility layers to make it think it's .NET 3.5 or whatever. .NET Core, typically you're going to distribute with an app. Yeah. It's going to need a version of .NET Core. You can bundle it with your application. Your application can use a completely different version from another version of the application that also bundles whatever version it needs. Yeah. So basically the .NET Core gets distributed with the app as a bunch of DLLs. And Xamarin is for the cross-platform mobile development where Microsoft acquired them. Obviously .NET Standard feeds into Xamarin as well. So they're going to start to collapse that Xamarin feature set in. Yeah. So what is PowerShell Core? The real reason why we're here. It's an open source cross-platform version of PowerShell built on top of .NET Core, and it runs on Windows, Mac and Linux. Yeah. There is full language support. It's probably a little asterisk there. There are some subtle changes that are coming in with the new version, to support that cross compatibility of more to deal with the intricacies of dealing with Linux and Mac rather than just pure Windows environment. So it's a full language implementation with remoting support. Yeah. And there's support for all commandlet types, with the exception of WMI type stuff. But see, if you've got C# commandlets, as long as they're compatible with .NET Standard 2, then they should work in PowerShell Core. Yeah. If you've got any script-based resources or SIM, as long as they're running on a Windows machine that implements the namespaces that are needed for SIM, then they'll work as well. Yeah. There's also support for classes. And it is the future of PowerShell, which we'll come on to in a second. With the exception of workflows, because workflows aren't supported, because they're built on some Windows components, like Windows Communication Framework or something. Yeah. So why do we need PowerShell Core? Sorry, let me rephrase that. So why do Microsoft want PowerShell Core? Yeah, Azure, and Azure. Yeah, from Microsoft's perspective, they're putting a lot of effort, quite rightly so, in cloud computing, and Azure is obviously their kind of go-to market for cloud-based resources, and they're happy for you to run whatever workloads you want on Azure, as long as you're running them on Azure, right? So whether they're Windows workloads, whether they're Linux-based workloads, Microsoft really don't care. They just want your money, right? And Microsoft need to make adopting the Azure cloud platform nice and easy. Therefore, they need to make it easy for developers that aren't just developing in a pure Windows environment. Yeah. They need to make it easy for Linux or Mac-based development people, be able to consume Azure services. Yeah. So Microsoft want you to use Azure, and they don't want you going to Google, they don't want you going to Amazon, and they want to make it as painless as possible. Yeah. Now, for us Windows administrators, historically that's been fine. We've had the Azure commandlets, and all their intricacies and lack of documentation. But all intents and purposes, they probably do work fairly well. But for the Mac and Linux guys, they've been left with the CLI commandlets, and they're obviously the text-based parsing, or prayer or whatever you want to do with that text-based data that comes back from those commandlets. So what Microsoft can do with cross-platform object-orientated shell, which is PowerShell, they can bring the benefits that we've had in a Windows environment, and those tools, they'll work exactly the same on Windows as they'll work on Linux, and vice versa. So whether you are a Linux developer, a Mac developer, or you're running a Windows machine, whether you need to go from Linux to Linux, or Mac to Mac, or Mac to Linux, or Windows or Mac, or whatever you need to do, you can use PowerShell to do that. You can use PowerShell Core, there's remoting support, and it all works. Yeah? It's pretty much the similar sort of story for VS Code. So why Microsoft released VS Code? For the similar sort of reasons. They want you to consume Azure resources. If you're developing traditionally in Sublime or whatever, then obviously there's all the tooling around that. Visual Studio didn't work on Macs. Xamarin Studio, you could argue sort of did, but that's more of it's actually a different product.
So does this mean an end to the ISE?
So the question is, does this mean an end to the ISE? No, I don't think it does. It probably means that there's the end of the development roadmap for ISE.
Also, there is an extension for VS Code that basically turns it into ISE.
Sort of. There are some features that are missing. If you're going to run VS Code, you've got to install it on a server. If you need to get access to that, obviously you should do all your development on your client device. You check it in source control, you've got your continuous integration pipelines. I know that the real world doesn't like that, work like that. You've got Notepad as well, right? So what does this mean for Windows PowerShell? And this is Windows PowerShell that is bundled in box, that is dependent on the full .NET framework. Yeah. So we're currently on version 5.1. That ships with Server 2016. It's going to continue to be distributed with Windows, right? The full version is not going away, but I think this is probably the most important point you need to think about. You don't have to do anything in the short term, but Microsoft have actually said that all development is going into PowerShell Core, cross-platform. Development of Windows PowerShell, i.e. that's tied to the full .NET framework, development is ceasing pretty much. Yeah. They've said that high priority bug fixes will obviously be made available. They may, there's an extension lead that sticks out there. New features may be backported into the full Windows PowerShell that you know and love, that's bundled with your with Windows. But PowerShell 5.1 might be the actual last release of Windows PowerShell. It's going to be bundled in box. It's going to be ultimately long term. It's going to be a feature that's going to get deprecated, a bit like PowerShell 2 is going away. Windows PowerShell 2. Microsoft have announced that that's going to be deprecated. It's not going to be in the next release of Windows. Yeah. PowerShell 2 was released with what? Windows 7? Yeah, 2008 and Windows 7. Yeah. It was Vista. Yeah. I thought Vista was 1. Anyway, a long time ago, right? If you remember Windows XP and Vista, then you've been around the block as well. So, Windows PowerShell, everything you've got today is going to continue to work. It's not going to break. You can continue to use it. Yeah? You can remote from PowerShell Core to Windows PowerShell. That all works fine. Yeah? And back the other way. So, just be aware that you really should be targeting PowerShell Core now, moving forward. New features, when they're introduced, they're probably going to be only introduced into PowerShell Core. So, let's have a look. And when we're dealing with the internet, what could possibly go wrong? Right, so let me spin this up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through just a quick installation of it actually installing PowerShell Core. So I'm sure I didn't type that properly. So what I've got here is I've got an Ubuntu server. Let me make the text bigger. Where's my font? Here it is. Can you all read that at the back? Does it need to be bigger? So I've got an Ubuntu-based server here. It's a fresh install. I've done an update, but there's no PowerShell. PowerShell is not installed on this Ubuntu box. Yeah. There are instructions on the GitHub page, the PowerShell. So if you want to have a look at open source PowerShell, you can go and contribute. So PowerShell. So here is the official project page. You can see the commits, you can see the number of issues, pull requests. But you can actually download the source here, you can compile it, you can do what you need to do. There is, if I bring this up, there is also, I'll use the IC just for a laugh. There is a unified install script. It's actually hosted, as you can see, within the PowerShell library here. There is, if you go to that URL, the URLs are in the slide decks, and obviously they'll be available, and they're made available at the end as well. There's a blog post here, but the actual unified installer is hosted within the GitHub repo, and you can run this on any Windows, any Mac or Linux-based installation. It's not going to work too well on a Windows-based box. It does work if you're using Windows subsystem for Linux. Yeah? So it's asking me for sudo password. So this is going to download PowerShell Core. It's going to run everything it needs to do depending on the speed of the internet. It's going to download. It's going to install PowerShell Core on this Ubuntu box, and that would work, across any Debian or Red Hat installation. It'll work on Mac OS X as well, OS 10, should I say. So this is going to download and install. I'm going to take you through an install on Windows as well in a minute. There are a couple of different options for Windows. But when this is done, it's going to be PowerShell, right? I'm going to be able to run PowerShell, and I'm going to be able to run any PowerShell scripts that I've got, assuming that they work on PowerShell Core installation. So if I run PowerShell, you can see I'm running version 6, beta 7. Apparently the full 6 release is going to be out fairly soon, so I hear. If I run PS version table, you can't really see that green there, but I'll just run the PS version table. You can see that I'm running Core. I'm running on Linux. It's a Unix variant, and that's PowerShell Core. Yeah. If I was to look, let me just install on Windows first. So, any questions? Fairly straightforward, right?
What about commandlets? So all the commandlets that are in Windows world, are they in?
No, not all of them, no. I'll take you through some of that. So there are the PowerShell Core commandlets that are bundled with PowerShell Core, and they're the same across Mac and Linux and Windows. But they are not all the same core commands that are in Windows PowerShell. So out of the box, you can have different sets.
So
Yeah.
you mentioned you can have like a parallel versions of PowerShell Core, right? And on Linux you install this review one. So if the full one gets released, then you go ahead and do the same process of installation.
Yep, you can.
End up with two different ones, right?
Yes, you will.
And do like in-place upgrade.
There's no in-place upgrade. It will be you download and wherever you could. So when we look at the Windows, we're going to do the Windows now. You can just download a zip file and extract it. If you want to overwrite the existing installation, you can do on the existing Windows box, and the same in the Linux environment. I'm not a Linux guru, so hence why the universal script, I have manually installed it. It's just easier to run the universal installation script, and that will install the latest version. So from a Windows perspective, I don't know why I got a double log on. It's obviously a 1703 installation quirk. Let me spin up PowerShell. So I'm going to use PowerShell on this box. This is Windows PowerShell, remember? So this is PowerShell that's bundled inside. It's probably a bit big. So I'm using, this is full PowerShell. So I'm using 5.1. I'm running on the desktop. I'm not running the Core Edition. Desktop is Windows PowerShell. There are two ways of installing PowerShell in a Windows environment. You can use an MSI or you can use a zip file. So what I do have in my and this is all up in the GitHub repo that you can get access to anyway. So here I'm going to invoke a web request. I'm going to download the latest release. This is an MSI release. So it invokes a web request, downloads the page, searches for the latest MSI that's published. It's going to download that and then it's going to install it. And this is just a bog standard MSI. Right here. It's moaning that I use a require statement, but I'm actually running a script. I'm just pasting it into the console. So here, it's downloading. Hopefully, it's about 50 meg. Is that 40 meg or like 4, 5, 6? That might be there a while. It's going to download that and then it's just going to run an MSI. The difference between the MSI and I've got another script here for installing the portable version is just a zip file. So if you look at it's just going to look on the website for the latest 64-bit zip. It's then going to download it. It's going to unblock it, and then it's going to create a folder. You see program data PowerShell, and then it's just going to expand the archive. It's going to expand the zip file into that folder, and then within there is going to be PowerShell.exe, and I can run it. The MSI, when I install it, it adds a start menu shortcut that says Windows PowerShell 6.00 beta, and if you look in add remove programs as well, you'll see an entry in there. But if you'd installed the MSI for beta 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7, you looked in add remove programs, you would have 7 different installations that have been installed into separate folders, and you could run them all side by side. I don't know whether that's a good or a bad thing at the minute. Yeah, absolutely. So when you run a script, how are you going to make sure that the correct version of PowerShell is invoked? There can only be one default on a system. The default today is Windows PowerShell, okay, not PowerShell Core, so you need to make sure that you kind of handle that. There you go. It's just an MSI it's going to install. I was planning on running the zip file install, but I'm not going to bother. I'd end up with two installs of PowerShell 6 beta 7, side by side. But I will have in my start menu, you can see I've got a shortcut here, which launch PowerShell. Obviously, it launches in a different shell. It's still PowerShell though, right? If I did PS version table, could you read that? Yeah. So I've got Windows PowerShell running here, and I've got PowerShell Core running here from Windows PowerShell because it's just a console host here. You can see if you had, you can't really see that down here, but there's a version specific directory here. It's a bit dull, the monitor, isn't it? But I can, so from Windows PowerShell, I'm going to launch PowerShell Core. We'll do PS version table now. Yeah, so from Windows PowerShell, I've launched PowerShell Core. Yeah. And obviously, if
Reporting WS man stack version in there. I thought you said it was decoupled from WMS.
so Windows, so WS Man is an open standard. Yeah, it's nothing to do with the Windows .NET framework. So this is like WinRM. So the version of remoting stack that's on the machine, not the version of the Windows management framework. Yeah. So yeah, I'm running PowerShell Core on this machine. Any questions on the install? Fairly straightforward. Yeah. First problem's getting it on the boxes. I've got it on Windows box and I've got it on an Ubuntu box. So let's have a quick look. Let's have a quick look at some commands. So let's look at the available commands that are here. So if I run this on a Windows installation, I've got 445 commands out of the box for PowerShell Core. If I run this on Linux, I've got 352. Yeah. So the commands I've got available, there's a subset on the Linux. Obviously, some of them are Windows specific. Yeah. I'm not going to sit here and go through them for with you. I'm sure you can work that one out. So let's have a look at some commands. So if we were to run get process, fairly straightforward. It should be any surprise to anybody. But if I run get process on an Ubuntu box, this looks exceedingly like get process on a Windows box. Obviously, the processes are different. You're not going to see the same process list, but it looks, it looks like PowerShell. If I do pipe it into get member, I'm not getting text. I'm getting a system diagnosis process, object, in the diagnostics namespace. This is an object, so I have all of my properties, methods, members that I'd expect to have on a .NET Core implementation of this object. Yeah? Now that might be different from the full .NET framework, but it's going to be the same on a Windows and a Linux box when they're both running PowerShell Core. Yeah? And all your language things work. So here I've got, if I do it on the Linux box here, so I'm piping it into where. Notice that this is lowercase. So this is not case sensitive, even on a Linux box. Fortunately, because that would catch us all out, right? So I can pipe it to for each. So you can do. Let me minimise that one. Now it's a for each. Just pick the ID property out. So I've just got a list of all the IDs here, and obviously you could go with the whole select object. Whatever you want. Obviously you wouldn't normally use aliases. So same command, just written differently. You're using one's for each, one using select and expand. Pretty straightforward. Get location, and again, just like on a Windows box, we will end up with this notion of we have a PS provider So this is the file system provider. You know, I've got file path, so this supports Linux paths. You know, things like, I'll pick on this one. So join path. You know, are going to work on a Linux box. No sticky keys, no thanks. Yeah. So here you can see I've joining two paths together. You can't really see that, but it's joining the etc directory and then adding on the SSH daemon config file. So they all work. Obviously, one's backslashes, one's forward slashes. Yeah, one's parent path, one's a child path, but the actual commandlets work the same across both instances. Any questions?
Do you get tab complete with it?
Yes. Yep. Tab complete comes in. So when you say tab complete, let's have a look. I don't know about the dynamic. So you want about dynamic parameters? So if I was to do name and then, so in answer to your question, yes, sort of. Oh, it doesn't, PS read line I don't think is installed here, which is why you're not getting that. Yeah. So this is a list of all the available processes. But if I was to pick on N, looks like there's only one N, then yes, yeah, it does complete. So there are new variables that are available in a core installation. So you'll see there's an is core CLR, is Unix, yeah, is Mac OS. It used to be on previous betas, it was is OS 10, yeah, is Windows. There are some differences in the PS version table. So you'll see no build version anymore in the version of .NET Core, because that was kind of tied to the Windows build version, you know, being on the tied to the Windows management framework beforehand. There are new, this is kind of like the new build number. It's the commit ID from Git, yeah, that published this release. And there's an OS and a platform, so you've seen this. So the OS was that Linux, yada yada, whatever the specific OS you're running on, and the platform said Unix, yeah, whereas it'd say Windows on a Windows box. Yeah. Some gotchas. Yeah. So when you run PowerShell.exe, the default is now file. It used to be command, so you used to be able to run PowerShell and then just run a command that runs. Yeah. That no longer works. The default is now file. Yeah? I've got an example of this. So if you run PowerShell and then you just type something, it's going to try and convert that to a file path to run the script, yeah? Rather than run a command. Yes, question?
Do you know why?
There is a reason. I can't remember what it is. There's a lengthy issue. This was changed quite a while ago now. But there's a lengthy issue up on GitHub. I'll see if I can find it and put it out. But there is a good version. It's from the Linux side of things rather than the Windows side of things. Yeah. Obviously, aliases are now removed. This one catches me out because I type ls in all the time. Yeah. That works in the Windows environment. ls, guess what? It works in the Unix environment. Yeah. On Linux environment, it works on Ubuntu. I just get text-based output rather than objects. Yeah. So I don't get file info objects. I end up getting a bunch of text back. Yeah. You've got to remember about file encodings and line endings. The line endings are different on Linux. Yeah, so all new lines, not carriage returns and new lines. Yeah. If you work in Git quite a lot, you'd have seen this. This is an historical problem that's been going on for ages. Obviously, there are no Windows-specific commandlets. So this is some of the difference that you see between the two when we did the counts of the number of commandlets that are available. So get service doesn't exist in the Linux or Mac-based installation, nor do the local user ones. Now, in theory, there's no reason why these can't be introduced. I think that the problem they've got is depending on which distribution or flavor of Linux you're running, then all of the service management commandlets or commands, should I say, and all the user-based management commands are different based on which distributions and things you're using. So they'd have to kind of normalize those across the two. And the build version and the CLR version have gone from the PS version version table. Yeah. I see, the reason I mention this is I see a lot of scripts that check for what build version they're running on to assume what version of the OS they're running on, right? Obviously, they're not going to work if you try and convert them to PowerShell Core, so you're going to have some work to do there. It does work. So PowerShell Core does work, and that universal install script does work on the Windows subsystem for Linux. Who's used this on a Windows 10 box? Yeah, so this is your enabled developer mode. You fire up a command prompt, you type in bash, and it says, hang on a minute, it's going to download an Ubuntu-based image. There are more coming. They may be available in the store now. And you can run bash scripts and things on your Windows development box. Yeah. Pretty cool. So you can launch PowerShell, or you could launch CMD to then launch PowerShell, to then launch bash, to then install PowerShell Core if you really wanted to. I'm not suggesting that's the right way of doing things. It does work. There are some problems with PS readline and the way that the console's rendered. So I've heard that they are being resolved in the next release, i.e. the next version of Windows 10, but I haven't seen that yet. Yeah. You can manage this, so I found these commands, I just thought I'd mention them. So you can run, if you've enabled the developer mode and then installed the Microsoft Windows subsystem for Linux, you can actually reset it. So if you install stuff in there and you just want to wipe it out and download a new virtual machine, you can use these commands. You know, I try and automate everything. I try and not click through things. Yeah, so that's what I've done there. So PowerShell remoting, just a high-level overview of what PowerShell remoting is. So WS-MAN, yeah, is an industry standard communications protocol. Yeah. WinRM is Microsoft's implementation of that. Yeah, so you'll see. So there's a PowerShell provider for WS-MAN. We can, you know, when you're configuring remoting on an agent or a server, you'd go like WS-MAN : / you know, local machine, client, trusted host, whatever you need to do. We're at this level of the stack. Yeah, so we're in the WS-MAN, WinRM. PowerShell remoting, or PSRP, sits on top of that stack. Yeah. So PowerShell remoting sits on top of WinRM / WS-MAN, yeah, and is used for the stateful protocol communications between PowerShell sessions and pipelining. It's the WS-MAN / WinRM that's responsible for the actual communication. And by default, it's over HTTP. This part is encrypted. Yeah, so whilst this bit isn't encrypted by default, this bit is. So PowerShell remoting is secure by default. You can obviously secure that with HTTPS. Now, why do I mention this? Because when it comes to PowerShell Core, when we're talking about cross-platform, Microsoft are introducing SSH as a transport option. So replacing the WS-MAN / WinRM part of PowerShell remoting using SSH. Yeah? So this part, not this part, they need to make some changes here to support SSH, but in terms of they are, you know, providing this. This is why, are you aware that Microsoft are involved in the Win32 development for the Open SSH project on GitHub? Yeah? This is the reason why. So you're going to be able to install SSH on Windows, yeah, as a server, so you can remote from a Mac or a Linux-based PowerShell Core installation. You can remote over SSH to a Windows server, or you can go the other way around, right? So you can go from Windows to Linux. You can go Windows to Windows over SSH now in PowerShell Core as well. Yeah. You do need to install OpenSSH. There is a script that's available in the repo that I put together. So this will go. There's a zip file and things that need to that you need to download. So this will go and download the latest release, it'll unzip it, it'll expand it, and then there's a whole load of configuration that you need to do, so this script will just do it. So you can run this on a Windows 10 box, and it's going to download and install OpenSSH, yeah, and configure it, and then you'll be able to SSH onto that box from a Linux-based environment. Yeah. The key, when you're reading the documentation, there's links to where this documentation is here we add a subsystem, so there's like a PowerShell endpoint, if you like, for the SSH daemon when it's listening. When the PowerShell remoting session comes in, it launches that rather than your standard shell via SSH. Yeah, Windows supports that. Do you know that? Yeah, Windows supports forward and backslashes. Linux doesn't. So, got a problem. You can see I'm doing some stuff around replacing, just new lines with carriage return line feeds. Yeah? So, how does that feed into DSC Core? Well, there's a blog post that was published by Joey, the PowerShell team, not so long ago. It was a couple of weeks ago, I think. They are reworking PowerShell, DSC, sorry. So there's going to be a new implementation of DSC based on PowerShell Core. And there's going to be no dependency on WMI or the Windows Management Framework. It's going to be Xcopy. There is going to be some changes to probably, what they're saying, to the built-in, like the file, the script, the service, or the built-in PowerShell commandlets that are bundled in Windows as part of WMF. When they're broken into DSC Core, there are going to be some syntactical changes. Maybe some of the parameter names are going to change, the formats or whatever, because they now need to support DSC cross-platform. And DSC will work exactly the same on Windows as it does on Linux and Mac as well. It's going to be part of the PowerShell Core installation. So when you install it, you're going to get DSC Core on Linux as well. So just to wrap up, ideally you want to be targeting the PowerShell Core for all future development. Obviously sprinkle a bit of fairy dust on that, unicorns, rainbows, whatever. Take it slowly, but it is the way forward. If you need Windows workflows or PowerShell workflows, then you need to stick on the full version. Like most things in Microsoft, the full Windows PowerShell is not going away. It'll be around for the next 10 years probably. And by then we'll be on something different. If you're going to take a look at PowerShell Core, you need to also probably be looking at the Win32 version of OpenSSH. Get that installed, have a play with that, get it configured. That's going to open up a whole can of worms. If you're a Linux estate, you've probably done it already, but you're going to have to start looking at SSH key management. Yeah. So rather than relying on usernames and passwords like you've seen, how do you manage SSH keys for remoting to all this stuff? And desired state configuration core. There are changes coming to the core resources. I suggest you look at Tug as an alternative for PowerShell. Pool server. Microsoft don't seem to want to be doing any development on that. The one that's bundled. No. If you do want a proper pool server, you know what they'll say, go and use Azure DSC or Automation DSC. Go and pay $5 a month for it per node. There is currently no support for Mac OS. That's obviously coming. Some resources, they're all up on the GitHub. You can go and get them. There's the GitHub link. Any questions?
Can I ask a question?
Yes?
Have you noticed, you've worked with both of them, have you noticed like any situations where it's the same command where it kind of, it might be quite a long fancy-ish command that would work perfectly with the Windows version. When you transfer that to the Linux version, it just doesn't work because...
No, I've not noticed any. And I'll be perfect. Most of my development these days is still in Windows PowerShell. It's not. Well, it's still in beta, right? So it's not even out there. I think what they have done is they've done a lot of good work in making sure that if there are any discrepancies between the two, they just don't ship it. So they could have done stuff with like get service or get local user. They decided that it's better to don't ship it. We can ship it later, right? When we figure that story out. Excuse me.
I just remember there was some commandlets in PowerShell, where I can't remember what they were, a little while ago, but where you were taking advantage of like processing, and that version of PowerShell was actually written in SAML. Do you remember?
Yeah.
Some of the commanders where in normal PowerShell you could do a WMI query and just put your like Win32, your version of XAML, you have to actually put minus name. You know, you actually have to specify that I'm now giving the name of the WMI query. It wouldn't work in the other version. You know what I mean? So as a best practice.
Was that a difference between PowerShell versions rather than a cross-platform issue though? Was that a difference between versions on Windows, like PowerShell 4 and 5, for instance, or 3 and 4?
I don't know. I can't quite remember what it was for, but it just like, I suppose in my mind, I just thought full best practices always just specify which, like if you were going to put the name of something, just put minus name. Don't just write it.
So yeah, there might be some discrepancies with the position, the parameter permissions, yeah. And Wozniak, where is he? Is he in here today?
As a rule of thumb, always use name.
Yeah, wherever possible. Yeah,
So it's a best practice.
yeah. As a best practice, always specify the parameter name wherever possible to avoid that parameter binding errors. I think that's it. So thank you.